My name is Irene. I attend church every Wednesday and Sunday to praise our Lord. I have been going to my church for the past 30 years. I pray constantly, I tithe, and I participate in the church potluck every Wednesday. It wasn't until recently that I found out that my church has a dark secret. The church secretary, Gloria, and I have been friends since I started attending. She is the one who runs the potluck, and she also takes attendance for each service. Once in a while, she also looks over the church budget. There she found thousands of dollars that came up missing. She had looped me in to have a fresh pair of eyes to assist her. She was right. The church budget would be right on par, but the third week of every month thousands of dollars would just disappear. We decided to pay attention to the third week of every month. What we discovered after just 3 months was alarming. The pastor and the deacons would tell the congregation that they would go to retreats monthly. The third week of the month, to be exact. They said that they would be spreading the gospel as well as helping the community by volunteering. We decided to tail them to their so-called retreat. As they were leaving the church one evening, we followed them to their event stop. It was to a strip club, just a couple of towns over. Neither one of us wanted to go in morally, and having 2 older women standing around we would stick out like a sore thumb. So we asked a younger gentleman named Jeremy, who was going into the club anyway, to follow the pastor and deacons and report to us in a couple of hours. We paid him $100, and he agreed. We had staked out across the street at a Waffle House. From the booth we were sitting in, we could see the front entrance of the strip club. We ordered food, and we kept ordering refills for our coffees while we waited for Jeremy's report. Right on the dot, Jeremy came out 2 hours later and sat in the booth with us. He had a look of shock on his face as he scooted in. He said that there was no way that the men we had him follow were from the church. Some of the things they were saying and doing were not in a godly manner. They were doing cocaine, taking shots, and the pastor, who had been a married man for 40 years, was making out with one of the dancers named Serenity. The other part was they were throwing down $100 bills like they were paper. Gloria and I looked at each other and couldn't believe the report. We thanked Jeremy, and he went on his way. I wasn't sure what our next plan of action was, but we had to bring these men down. We bided our time and waited until the next month. One of our congregation members named Walt, who was a retired photographer for the local newspaper, wanted to aid in our investigation by taking pictures. He had overheard us talking at the potluck last week. He said he was looking for something interesting to do because he was bored after retirement. Tonight was the night we were going to strike. We followed them again, this time to a different strip club in a different town. So we had another stakeout inside the McDonald's across the street. Walt waited in the car and took pictures of the men walking into the strip club with his camera. He eventually came inside the restaurant and sat down next to us. His photos were so close up that you could see the pores on their faces. He was good at his job. We waited for an eternity for them to come out. Walt took his position again in the car and took more photos of them coming out looking disheveled. The pastor had white residue under his nose, and a few of the deacons had lipstick stains on their collars. One of them even had makeup residue on his crotch. This was our smoking gun, and we couldn't wait to go to the news with our discovery. The very next morning, all 3 of us went to Walt's former boss with the photo evidence and the church budget snafus every month. He informed me that this was a huge story, and he thanked us for our hard work and research. They dedicated an entire segment to us on the evening news. We felt a huge sense of accomplishment. The pastor and every single deacon resigned and left the church that very evening. They were hounded by reporters as they were leaving the church and didn't say a word to any of them. The word is that they are going to be prosecuted for embezzling the money that we had been putting in the offering plates. I'm not sure if they did it because they didn't think they were going to get caught, or if they let their little heads do the thinking for them. The pastor swore he would get revenge on us, but I told him that it would be hard for him to do that behind bars.
Choices. I am homeless. About 10 years ago, I developed a strong habit of drinking. I put it as a priority over everything in my life. I lost my job, eventually, my wife, and now my kids are no longer speaking to me. I tell myself daily that it was what I deserved for putting them in such a horrible position. I sometimes get arrested on purpose just so I can have a hot meal and something soft to sleep on. It doesn't help that I have an ongoing rap sheet, but you gotta do what you gotta do. I once even just walked up to a cop and shoved him. I also can't keep a steady job because the second I get any form of money, I just gravitate towards the closest liquor store. I have even gotten a few jobs where they serve alcohol, and I instantly get fired for drinking on the job. I thought my luck had changed when I saw an advertisement for free pizza. Below the bold letters were a date, time, and address. I hadn't eaten much for the past couple of days, so pizza sounded immaculate. So I showed up right on time to the address. It was an old convenience store that was converted into a church. I had thought it was a weird aesthetic, but hey, free pizza is free pizza. So I walked and grabbed a plate and got in line. I must have grabbed an entire large pizza and put it on my plate. I ate it so quickly you would have thought it was a contest. Right as I was about to throw my trash away and walk out, a pretty young lady stopped me and asked me to return to my seat and she would give me something to drink. I delightfully returned to my seat as she brought me an ice-cold Diet Pepsi. As I started drinking it, a man jumped up on a podium and started speaking. He said that he hoped we enjoyed the meal and that he was going to start his sermon. I got roped into a church service with free pizza. I felt like a fool, but to be respectful, I did stay and listen. The preacher talked about how sometimes we make horrible choices in life and feel like there is no one to turn to. Some of us might have lost our jobs, our livelihoods, or both. I felt like he was speaking right to me. He then goes on to say that God is the only one that will never abandon me. I took it to heart and listened very intently to the rest of his message. I had never considered God forgiving me because I couldn't forgive myself. Ended with a prayer and suggested that if anybody needed to speak with him, he was going to stick around for a little bit. I had to thank him for giving me some perspective. I had to wait in line and talk to him because I wasn't the only one who was moved by his message. However, I waited patiently in line for my turn to come. The first thing he did was stick his hand out to shake. He then asked me for my name. I told him it was Roger, and he jokingly said, like the rabbit? I shared a laugh with him. I went on to thank him for his message and thank him for the clarification that he gave me. He told me that there was more where that came from at this same address every Sunday. He also enticed me with free donuts and coffee. I knew exactly where I was going to go on Sunday. That Sunday morning, I hopped over to the local YMCA and took a shower. I didn't have nice clothes, but I put on the best outfit that I had. When I arrived at church, right in the foyer, donuts and coffee. I had my fill and walked into the sanctuary to wait for the sermon. The preacher came out of a corridor at the back of the stage and started with prayer. As everyone had their heads bowed and their eyes closed, I looked around and was in awe about how he could command everyone's attention. How powerful this man truly was. I admired him and I wanted to know more about him. Continued with his service, and it was a little bit more harsh than the one he gave on Pizza Day. I wasn't sure if I liked it or not, but again the way that he commanded a whole room of people was admirable. After the service, I found him again and we started talking about religion. He then invited me to a plot of land that he owned where he did a seminar that lasted Monday through Saturday. He said it was free of charge and I would have a cabin to sleep in, a shower to use, and 3 meals a day. Of course, I accepted. He told me the bus would leave from the church tomorrow morning. I was not going to miss that bus. The next morning, I packed up what belongings I deemed necessary and hopped on the bus. I had recognized a few other homeless people that I've encountered throughout my time on the streets. I'm glad I'm not the only one who thought this man was a miracle worker. We drove the bus into the country and eventually to our destination. It was acres of wood with the camp sitting right in the middle. The first thing that I did was located my cabin and had the best shower of my life. When I first arrived, they handed me an itinerary of the events that were going on all week. I noticed that the Monday night service was at 8 p.m. So I did a bunch of activities throughout the day until the service started. I did eat 3 times a day for the first time in years. The rest of the week was great. They had activities like swimming, archery, and hiking. The strange part was that at each service there were less people as the week went on. I just assumed that people needed to head home for their jobs or their families, so I didn't think much of it. As I was heading for the 8 o'clock service on Saturday, the same sweet young lady caught me before I could walk into the sanctuary. She informed me that I was going to go to a special service that evening. I felt honored and went right where she told me to go. It was a little deeper in the woods and next to a lake. I was in the room with 6 other people. One of the 6 was Charlie. He and I were acquainted and often camped out in the same area. As I took my seat and said hi to Charlie, the preacher walked in. He wasn't in his usual suit and tie and was wearing a red robe. He greeted us by saying, "Hello, and welcome to the cleansing." We all looked around at each other in confusion. He then went on to say that this world is full of degenerates and people that abuse the power that God gave them. He said that we needed to prove that we were worthy and told us the details of the cleansing. He was going to give all 6 of us a 10-minute head start into the woods, and if we could make it to the top of the mountain where 3 wooden crosses stood, then we would be considered worthy. What we had to do was make it through a part of the woods, swim across the lake, hike to the top of the mountain, and make it to the crosses. All while that is going on, he as well as a few disciples would be shooting bows and arrows at us. Told us that typically only 1 out of a group of 6 will make it. My blood ran cold as I looked around the room and saw the same thing happen to the other 5 people. He and a group of other hooded men walked us to the starting line. When he shot the starting gun, we were given our 10-minute head start. He shot up in the air, and I immediately took off running because my life was dependent on it. I started through the woods, leaping over logs and ducking under branches while avoiding sinkholes in the dirt. I arrived at the bed of the lake and jumped right in. I have never swum so fast in my entire life. Just then I heard an arrow whistle pass my ear and land right in the water next to me. They were starting to shoot at us. I got to the opposite edge of the water and started climbing the mountain. I slipped a little bit and twisted my ankle, but I was not going to let that stop me. Again, I was avoiding arrows as they were starting to get more frequent. I climbed the mountainside until I had bloody hands and scraped shins. I eventually made it to the top of the mountain. I could see the crosses 10 feet away. I hopped up on top. I looked over to my left and saw Charlie. He looked like he was in pretty bad shape and he had an arrow through his calf. I couldn't just leave him like that, so I put him over my shoulder as we both made it to the crosses. I dropped him down at the base of the center cross. I checked on him to see if he was all right. He thanked me for saving him and told me that he wasn't going to make it. He said that he felt cold and that he could see a bright light as he looked up to the cross. He had proved that he was worthy, and now he was going to heaven. He took a final breath and he was gone. I looked around. I noticed there was nobody but me. I did it. I was the one of 6 that made it, besides Charlie. A few moments went by and the preacher approached from behind the crosses. He commended me and told me that I was worthy and that God had blessed me. I called him a hypocrite for the killing of innocent people. He laughed at me and told me that they were casualties in the war for righteousness. Told me I had a choice. I could return to the city and continue to be homeless, or I could stay on the land and have the luxuries of a new life. I told him that I would rather starve with the poor than feast with the corrupt. His smile quickly faded. I told him that I didn't need his help and I could make it back to the city on my own. As I was starting to walk away, I could hear him loading up an arrow into his bow. He shot it towards me and it landed right next to me. I stopped in my tracks and said, "I guess I really have been cleansed." I then continued to walk away as he dropped to his knees and screamed.
Hello, my name is Thomas. I am an 8th grader who is about to go to high school. The summer before my high school days started, I went to a church camp. And instead of worshiping our Lord, I suffered one of the most horrific experiences of my life. I am warning you now, it gets kind of graphic. We had all met up in the church parking lot one morning to commute 8 hours to the camp. I was groggy and very tired from not sleeping the night before. We had assigned seating on the bus. I had to sit with the annoying kid Anthony. He was mostly harmless, but once in a while, he would just be so annoying that not even his mom wanted to put up with him. That's why he was sent away to a 2-week camp. I'm just sitting on the bus, trying to get some sleep, and he's in my ear roaring like a dinosaur and barking like a dog every time I almost fall asleep. I tell one of the counselors and all they do is tell him to knock it off. It looks like I'm on my own with this. So I tell him to quit it or suffer the consequences. He didn't listen and he kept doing it. I hit my breaking point and I told him that he just needed to keep his mouth shut because the things he was doing were why nobody liked him and why his mom sent him away to camp for 2 weeks. I was a little harsh, but I didn't want to keep putting up with it the entire ride. I could tell I upset him. He started getting misty-eyed. He proceeded to be quiet the rest of the ride. I finally got some sleep and didn't wake up until we arrived. When I woke up, Anthony was still sniffling, and his eyes were beet red. I felt bad for yelling at him, so I decided to apologize after I got some sleep and some clarity. He didn't say a word as he grabbed his bag and stomped off of the bus. Whatever, I tried my best. As I got off the bus, I was greeted by the camp mascot, a dog named Lucas. He was a pretty husky. Not only did I have to ride with Anthony on the bus, but we were also bunkmates. I felt bad and asked him if he wanted the top or the bottom. He just pointed to the top. I was okay with that, so I threw my bag on the bottom bunk. As soon as we unloaded our stuff, it was time for dinner. The cook made cheeseburgers with French fries. After sleeping the entire bus ride, I was starving, so I scarfed that whole thing down in less than 2 minutes. I looked at Anthony and he was just staring at his burger. After dinner, we had a worship service which was joyful and energetic. Again, I looked over at Anthony and he was just standing there with that emotionless expression. I wasn't gonna let it ruin my time, so I praised and worshipped. It was time to return to the cabin to get some sleep. I wasn't tired because of my bus nap. So I tried to talk to Anthony and he didn't say a word to me. I eventually drifted off to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night and Anthony was rummaging through his backpack. I wasn't sure what he was doing, but I eventually fell back asleep. I didn't wake up until our counselor came in with a megaphone. They told us breakfast would be ready in 15 minutes. I hopped out of my bunk and looked up. Anthony wasn't there. I guess he already went to get some food. So I took a quick shower and went to the mess hall. Once again, he was just staring at his breakfast. It was biscuits and sausage gravy with a side of bacon. Once again, I ate the entire thing. After breakfast, we were given 4 hours to do whatever we wanted. So I decided to go and play some ping pong. When I got there, Anthony was sitting in a chair and staring out the window of the cabin. I just shook my head and played some kid named Brian. The rest of the day was pretty much the same as Anthony's. I just continued to do what I wanted to do and wanted to enjoy the experience of camp. We went to sleep that night, and once again I woke up in the middle of the night to Anthony rummaging through his backpack again. The next morning was a repeat of events, and that was pretty much the itinerary for a few days. I still was waking up to Anthony and him making sounds with his backpack. A few more days went by and the camp had a giant water slide that they had set up. It had to have been at least the length of a football field. I couldn't wait to get on it. So I was second in line behind Brian. There was a counselor at the beginning and a counselor at the end. So Brian got a running start and plopped down with all of his might. He had been sliding 50 yards and all of a sudden the water went from clear to red. About halfway through there was a spike sticking out of the ground. Brian had sliced his abdomen open as he was in absolute pain. He had to be rushed to the hospital. I had gotten word later that he was okay and just thought it was a freak accident at first. I looked over at Anthony and he had a smirk on his face. That is the first facial expression he's made the entire time at camp. I couldn't prove it, but I think he had something to do with the spike. That night, I acted like I was asleep, and I waited for Anthony to go through his backpack again. After he was finished, and went back to sleep, I decided to take a look inside of his backpack. Inside it was a sandwich bag filled with green cubes. Being raised by my grandmother, she would alert me to things like this. The green cubes were rat poison. I had no idea why he had that in his possession, but I was worried at this point. The next day, the camp mascot Lucas was rushed to the vet. They had said he got into rat poison and he didn't make it. I knew Anthony had something to do with it, and I thought I could prove it by grabbing the bag of the rat poison. That evening, I went through his bag while he slept, and it was gone. He had given the rat poison to Lucas. I'm sure of it, but I didn't want to tell the counselor unless I had proof. That night, I did the same thing. As I went through his backpack, I found a bottle of eye drops. I had watched a fair share of crime shows with my grandmother, so I knew that eye drops could make somebody very sick or kill them if ingested. That day, I steered clear of drinking any liquids. It almost killed me because it was such a hot day, but I didn't want to risk drinking anything in case he put it in something. That day 3 counselors had gotten sick and one of them had to be rushed to the hospital. I thought that my proof was ironclad, so I went to the head counselor and told them what was going on. They didn't want to believe me at first, but bad things have been happening since my church arrived. They began to search the cabin, and that included all of our belongings. Anthony's backpack was searched, and they found absolutely nothing. Anthony stared at me because he knew that I was the one who attempted to blow the whistle. The next day, I decided to go to the lake to cool off because the humidity was terrible. I had just been waiting in the lake by one of the docks. I had dunked under the water to cool my head off, and when I popped back up, Anthony was standing at the dock. He smiled at me, then grabbed my hair and dunked me under the water. He was a lot stronger than I was, so I continued to struggle as he was drowning me. He would lift my head once in a while, just to laugh in my face and tell me that he was going to kill me. He did this to me a handful of times before I felt myself getting weaker and on the verge of blacking out. Right as that was about to happen, I heard a whistle blowing and a counselor running on the dock to stop Anthony. He grabbed him and sat him down on the dock. The counselor reached their hand out to me and pulled me onto the dock. I was gasping for air and coughing up water. I was lucky to be alive. Anthony was reprimanded and eventually sent home. I couldn't prove that he was responsible for hurting Brian, the death of Lucas, or getting the counselor sick, but he was caught red-handed trying to drown me. He permanently ruined any type of camping for me. Church or otherwise, I've decided to spend my summers at home watching TV. Anthony was eventually sent to juvenile hall, where he got up to some more shady stuff, I was told. I am fearful of the day that he eventually gets out. Hi, my name is Josh. I am the youth minister of my church. I've always had a connection with children ever since I was a child myself. I'm always trying to get them closer to God. There are a lot of ministers out there who give us a bad name, but I'd like to think that I'm one of the good guys. I just gave my resignation to my current church last week because of an incident that I need to bring awareness to. Before I get started, I do have to warn you the story does involve a grown man abusing a small child. So if you wish not to listen, then enjoy your day. If you do, God bless your soul. I had only had my position for about 4 years. I've seen kids return to the church, and I've seen a lot more leave. I was always under the impression that they left because of moving or attending a different church. Oh, how wrong I was. They were leaving because of Brother Simon, and my discovery about that fact will haunt me until the day that I meet my Maker. I was staying late one evening because I was setting up for a Disciple Now event. It was a carnival theme, so I had games like bobbing for apples and a ring toss, and I even pulled a few strings and got a dunk tank from the local minor league baseball team. I was getting pretty exhausted and decided to call it an evening. As I was leaving, I noticed that the lights were on in Brother Simon's office. I decided to dip in and tell him to have a good rest of the evening. When I did that, I caught him disciplining a child with a paddle. The worst part was that he had her tied down to a chair. Her name was Abigail. She had been caught vaping around the church. She is 15 years old and did not deserve what Brother Simon was doing to her. I rushed in and shoved him to the ground and told him to stop. He told me I made a big mistake because nobody would believe me or Abigail, and they would believe him because he was the head of the church. I told him that I was going to try my hardest to get him fired. I untied Abigail and we left. She was in tears and her entire body was beat red from the paddle. I apologized to her and asked her if she would help me by getting Brother Simon fired. Through tears she told me she would help. Right after that, I called the police and reported child abuse. They came out and talked to Simon, who, of course, denied everything. I had forgotten to mention that the chief of police attended the church. He and Simon were thick as thieves. I should have known that was going to be way more complex than it needed to be. The chief of police interviewed Abigail and me. Concluded that I was the one that hurt her, and I was trying to tell her to say it was Simon. I could not believe what I was hearing. The chief of police had me arrested and told me that I was being detained and was going to be questioned at the station. I used my one phone call to call my lawyer, Carl. He told me not to say a word until he arrived, so that's what I did. They put me in an interrogation room, and that's where I waited not only for my lawyer, but for the chief to come and talk to me. They both walked in simultaneously. The chief was accusing me of everything that Simon was doing, and I had informed him that Abigail might be just the tip of the iceberg, and he was corrupt by trying to cover up for a friend who was a donor for the local police. He told me he wasn't picking favorites, and that he was just trying to bring me to justice. Carl interjected to the chief as to why I would call the police on myself. He also inputted that he talked to Abigail, and her testimony said that I was the one who rescued her, not the one who abused her. The chief told me since she was a child, her words didn't mean squat, and that I could have easily manipulated her into saying what I wanted her to say. My lawyer was furious because of how cold the chief was about a child calling out for help. He told him what a coward he was and that he was letting the almighty dollar speak higher than the truth. He demanded that I be set free because there was no evidence of the abuse. They let me go but told me not to go too far. I told him I wasn't going anywhere and that I was here to fight. Carl spent the next few days talking to children who no longer attended the church. At least a dozen of them came forward with abuse accusations. Most of them didn't want to come forward because they feared nobody would believe them, just like Abigail. There were multiple instances where they were caught doing something or saying something that Brother Simon deemed sinful. For example, one child was listening to a rap song that contained the word fuck. Another was caught kissing her boyfriend on the cheek. Another was caught scrolling through Instagram and looking at a model in a bikini. These were all children just living their lives when somebody deemed it necessary to step in and discipline them. It wasn't right. My lawyer also found evidence of where the chief of police had corruption in the past. He had a habit of doing favors for people in society who were some shady characters but continued to give the department money. Thanks to him, the degenerates felt untouchable, and Brother Simon was the current. Just in case my lawyer couldn't convince anybody, he had talked to the retired chief of police who felt that the current chief was corrupt. He was willing to testify and back not only myself but the kids as well. I was brought back in for more questioning. The current chief of police had a smirk on his face. That was until the retired chief walked in. He had told the chief that he needed to knock off his corruption and that he was onto him. The current chief for the first time looked intimidated. He told me that he would drop the investigation on me and that I was free to go. However, Simon got off scot-free. When I found out that he was going to stay at the church and not have any discipline, I had no choice but to leave. Luckily, I had a plan B. A new church that was opening downtown was looking for someone to fill the position. I didn't hesitate. I'm going to build these 4 walls and make them not only a holy place, but a safe place. No child should ever be questioned about abuse.
I believe my church is haunted. I heard cries in the night, and sometimes things aren't where I left them. My name is Marshall, and I'm the evening janitor at the Bridge Baptist Church. My job isn't much, but I do get paid very well by the pastor of the church. He and my dad were best friends growing up. I needed a job while I was attending community college, and he offered it to me, and I accepted it. Things were going fine the first couple of months I was there. Then I noticed something strange. Even with my headphones on full blast, I could have sworn I could hear someone trying to talk to me. The eerie part was that I worked alone nightly. It sounded like a woman, but I wasn't too sure. One of the strange things that would happen is items would not be in the places I originally sat them down. I would place a bottle of cleaner on the sink and I would turn around and it would be on the floor across the restroom. Last month I was setting up tables and chairs for an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and when I opened the closet door a chair came flying right at me. I luckily dodged it, but it took me an hour to just calm down. A few nights later, I was cleaning the nursery and one of the mirrors fell right off the wall and shattered next to me. I thought about quitting right there. However, I needed the money and didn't want to be known as the guy who chickened out. I had arrived early to talk to Pastor Rogers about the strange things occurring at night. When I told him, he said I had an active imagination and that I had nothing to worry about. He didn't take me seriously, not one bit. So I guess I'm on my own. I grabbed his empty Starbucks cup on the way out. I did some research about things flying across the room were misplaced items, and one thing that kept coming up was a poltergeist. It mostly had to do with an unruly spirit that haunts a certain place. That had to be it, I thought. So I began paying a little closer attention to its speech. Instead of listening to my headphones, I would just do my job and wait for a response. It finally happened last night. The spirit was hard to understand, but I could have sworn it said, office. I wish it could have said more because there are 4 offices in total at the church. Pastor Rogers, his assistant Clara, the head of daycare Stacy, and the youth minister Jonas. I've cleaned all of their offices consistently and with no sign of anything out of the ordinary. Another day went by and I listened closely again. I could hear the spirit say, rug. That narrowed it down to 3 offices. Rogers, Clara, and Jonas. Stacy didn't have a rug. I also noticed since I started listening, I haven't had objects thrown at me. The very next day, I once again listened. It was as clear as a bell said, under. So it wanted me to look under the rugs in the offices, which I proceeded to do, starting with Jonas, then working my way to Clara, and then finally, Pastor Rogers. I found nothing under Jonas's rug except a bunch of stuff that I swept under it from time to time. Clara's was completely spotless, so the only one left was the pastor's. I went into his office and raised the rug, to the best of my ability because half of it was weighed down by his desk. I looked and there was nothing there. As I turned to leave, I bumped his desk with my hip and dropped his coffee all over the wood flooring. I was furious because it was another thing I had to clean. So I went and grabbed a mop. As I returned, the coffee had outlined on the floor. I was confused at first, but thought to myself, is that a trap door? I knew I was going to be alone, so I moved the desk off of the rug, which was a chore. I placed the rug on the opposite end of the office and sure enough, it was a trap door. I had worked here for a while and never knew that there was a basement. I expected there to be some sort of key to unlock the door, but there wasn't a place for a key. It was already unlocked. All I had to do was pull up the handle. I looked into the hole and there was a staircase leading down to the basement. I couldn't see past a few steps because it was pitch black. I hesitated to go down, but just then the voice said, "Enter." I took a big gulp and a deep breath as I proceeded downward. I pulled out my phone to use as a flashlight, and it was just a brick wall on either side. It went straight down. I walked down that hallway what felt like for miles. It led me to a wooden door that was unlocked. I had no idea what I was getting myself into as I opened the door. What was inside there was shocking, to say the least. I entered, and I could smell nothing but rot. As I shined my light up against the back wall, there was a corpse. It was a woman who was dressed in what could only be described as prostitute clothing. As I stood there with my gaping jaw, an apparition appeared in front of me. As she began to speak, I instantly recognized the voice as the one talking to me the whole time. She had told me that she was murdered by Pastor Rogers and her corpse was left down in the basement to rot. She told me the only way that her spirit could be set free was if Pastor Rogers was brought to justice. As she said that, she looked behind me and said angrily, "So, you've come back." I shined my light, and there was Pastor Rogers with a pistol in his hand. He told me that he wished I didn't find what I found. Informed me that he had to kill me now because of my discovery, as he aims his gun at me. I ducked right as he shot his gun. The bullet went right through the apparition. She screamed in anger as I swept Rogers from underneath his feet. I took off, running down the hallway that I came from. Pastor Rogers eventually got up and started shooting at me down the hallway. I could hear and feel the casings zipping past my body. He was able to graze my shoulder with one of the bullets. I climbed up the stairs as he began to start chasing me. I closed the door with the rug over it and moved the desk back. I guess my adrenaline kicked in because I moved it like it was a cardboard box. It was enough to weigh down the door to where he couldn't get out. He was banging on it and demanding that I let him out. I told him that I wasn't going to until there were officers there to arrest him. I had all of the power. It felt kind of good because I began to think about how hopeless the spirit was, and how the tables had turned with Pastor Rogers feeling just as hopeless. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. About 20 minutes later, the police showed up. They weren't sure about what I had said on the phone, because Pastor Rogers was a pillar of the community. With their assistance, I lifted the desk and the rug. One of the officers opened the door, while the other one stood in front of the stairwell, and Pastor Rogers had shot him right between the eyes. The other officer emptied his whole clip into Pastor Rogers as his body fell into the darkness. As that was happening, I could hear the voice of the woman say, "Thank you." Her spirit was finally set free, and I never heard from her ever again. That was 4 months ago. I, of course, left the church immediately. My dad was crushed when he heard what a monster his best friend was, and was of course glad I was all right. I quickly got a job washing dishes at a restaurant called Aspen Creek. I've never been happier to just be washing dishes and not getting shot at or having spirits talk to me. The church eventually was closed due to the discovery. What made it worse was they had found more bodies hidden in the walls. Most of them were the corpses of missing women all around town. I don't know how I didn't hear them, but I assumed that they were also taking part in moving things and throwing things at me. I hope that their spirits are also free, just like the woman I helped. I was going to college to be a history teacher, but now I've switched my major to criminal justice.